Today we are going to be breaking down and taking a look at all of the gear that John Mayer used for his performance during the Made in America Festival on August 31st of 2014. It's always special to get a professionally recorded and shot Mayer concert, and this being the Born and Raised in Paradise Valley era just makes it that much more special. However, there is one thing that is very unique to this show and this show only, which really dictated the tone that John was going for the entire night, and we're going to discuss that once we get down to the pedal board portion of our breakdown today. But first, I'd like to touch on the guitars, then the amplifiers, and then save the pedal board for last, because that's going to be kind of the part where we do a lot more discussion and talking about in terms of how unique the Made in America performance was in terms of John's tone throughout the years. So let's get right on into today's breakdown. I know a lot of you guys have been asking for this one, so I'm super excited to break Made in America down for you all. Alright, so talking about the guitars that John used for Made in America, and what I'm going to do is just run through the entire set list from start to finish and list off the guitars that John used. We don't have that much to discuss in terms of them, but going to have a few comments here and there on them. So, looking at our very first guitar here, this guitar is wild. This nickel-plated Masterbuilt Stratocaster that John got early in 2014. It was Masterbuilt by Todd Krause, and it was a one-off guitar for the NAMM show in 2014 that John then ended up purchasing. This guitar is beautiful just looking at it and very unique with the nickel plating that was done to it. This guitar does get quite often confused with John's Eric Clapton custom shop Strat as well. They're similar in that kind of gray silver look to them on the body, but they are two different guitars. This one here you also will know from Barbra Streisand as well, Come Rain or Come Shine. John used this guitar as well for that performance. Very cool to see this one used live. It wasn't used that often, but in 2014 especially, kind of relatively around when John got the guitar, that's when we see this guitar get used the most often in terms of performances. So you have Manish Boy and Vultures, John using this nickel-plated Masterbuilt Stratocaster. Then we transition into Queen of California, and John actually uses two different guitars here. The very first one is a Martin 0042 SC John Mayer signature, and then when it comes to the outro, John swaps to his Eric Clapton custom shop Strat, and as I mentioned, can get kind of confusing, especially seeing both the Eric Clapton and the nickel-plated Strat the same night. What's really funny about Made in America as well is that I don't know if we have another night that's been at least professionally recorded where we see John playing so many mapleboard Strats. It's like most of the evening he's actually playing a maple Strat when he's playing electric guitar, which is kind of cool to see from this specific performance. John's choosing for a bit of a different tonal option and feel option, obviously, when it comes to these maple boarded guitars. One other thing I'd like to point out when it comes to the Eric Clapton signature Strat is that we don't know what build level this guitar actually is. I've tried to find a really good shot of the back of the headstock, and it's impossible to actually make out whether or not it's a serial number or someone's signature. I know Todd Krause built a few in this exact same spec and color for the custom shop as well. Masterbuilt these Eric Clapton signature Strats. Also unique to John's is that it doesn't actually feature the Eric Clapton signature on the headstock. That we can clearly make out, which obviously means that this is a special guitar that was probably built for John. I'm leaning towards it probably being masterable, but we just don't know for 100% certainty what kind of level of build this guitar actually is. So again there for the outro of Queen of California, we have the Eric Clapton Stratocaster as well as an electric performance of Who Says, something that certainly is rather rare, and the fact that we get it professionally recorded as well just makes this performance even better, that we hear an electric version of Who Says with the Eric Clapton Strat. Then we move on to No Such Thing, where we see John using his Martin OM28JM. Next up we have Belief, and actually the first time we see John playing a rosewood board Strat for the evening, and he brings out the black one for Belief. Then we move on to Slow Dancing in a Burning Room, and of course we get the 64 Stratocaster, and the Born and Raised Paradise Valley era is really where the 64 Strat cemented itself in kind of the history of John's live guitar usage. This is where a lot of people see the 64 Stratocaster and they'll think of the Born and Raised in Paradise Valley eras, especially these amazing performances of Slow Dancing in a Burning Room that we get with this guitar. Moving on, we also have XO, where John brings back out the Martin OM28JM. Following that, we go to Waiting on the World to Change, and then you guys will see here another fan favorite guitar that John has had for an extremely long time now, and it is his Monterey Stratocaster. That guitar just, it's a very special guitar to see John playing as well, and one I really wish he'd play more often. And even though the time of me making this video in 2023, we've had this guitar actually come out twice for 2 different John Mayer trio performances this year, still a guitar I'd love just to see a lot more of. After waiting on the world to change, John brings back out the Eric Clapton Stratocaster for a cover performance of All Along the Watchtower, and this is by far my favorite performance of the entire evening. This cover is absolutely brilliant, and the tone that John gets, especially for the solo, is just incredible. And we're going to dive into that a lot more when we talk about the pedal board, because the pedals that John uses for this solo are really kind of what's helping to give that incredible lead tone that he's getting throughout this cover performance. Then we have Gravity, where John brings back out, of course, the Black One. And just touching on it very briefly here, because I've mentioned it a few times on the channel, there is a video on YouTube where someone claims that the Black One's neck cracked during this performance of Gravity during Made in America. I've talked about it in a direct video response. I've talked about it in my whole documentary around the Black One. Touching on it just briefly here, the Black One's neck did not crack, so don't believe that video. It's completely wrong. The video that I did discussing that whole thing will be linked in the description down below if you want to hear me rant on about that just stupid video that's completely false information and spews for more views kind of mentality. Anyways, Gravity ends, and then we have one more performance of Dear Marie, where John brings back out again that 0042 SC Mayer signature Martin guitar, that kind of mini parlor guitar. I'm not a big acoustic guy, but a very cool acoustic guitar to see John playing, and one that actually is kind of interesting, and maybe I'll get one eventually, or something like that, a kind of more mini, smaller acoustic guitar. That could be kind of cool to, start diving into more acoustic guitar stuff for my personal playing. But anyways, that's all of the guitars. Let's move on to the amplifiers. Alright, so John's amp rig for Made in America is the typical born and raised Paradise Valley era amplifier setup, but there is one detail when it comes to the 2-Rock amps that you might have first noticed actually from the Made in America performance, because the footage we have is fantastic and you can actually see these little things in just that finer detail. Looking at John's 2-Rock amplifiers, you might have noticed that they are signed with this signature in white pen, not the typical red pen that you would have seen during the Where the Light Is performance and pretty much every other performance leading up to 2013. What ended up happening is that John, now that he was using 2 of his John Mayer signature 2-Rock amplifiers in his amp rig, wanted a few more built, and these additional amplifiers that were built in 2013 were assigned with a white pen rather than a red pen, which just helps distinguish which amps you're actually seeing. So these are some of John's newer 2-Rock John Mayer signature amplifiers, but of course they are just the standard Mayer signature amplifiers, just additional ones that 2-Rock had built for them. Now, in the new year, I'm planning on making a full John Mayer 2-Rock history video where I'm going to dive more into these white pen Mayer signature amplifiers and some other details in history of John with 2-Rock as a brand. So if you are keen on seeing that video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and you hit the bell button to be notified when that video comes out, and let me know in the comments down below if you would in fact like to see me make a kind of mini documentary around John's relationship with 2-Rock and the different amplifiers that are 2-Rock brand at least that John has used over the years. Now, in between the 2-Rock John Mayer signature white pen amplifiers, you have Dumble Steel String Singer 002, of course, and then they all sit on top of 6 Alessandro cabinets. Now, the different Alessandro cabinets actually had different speakers in them, and what we can see during different shots during the night of Made in America is that the bottom cabinets are all mic'd up, meaning that the 2-Rock John Mayer signature amplifiers have Celestion G1265s mic'd up that we are hearing, and then for the Dumble Steel String Singer, we are hearing Alessandro Neos in that Alessandro badged bottom Alessandro cab in the middle there. Alright, now it's at this time here where we're going to break down the pedal board and get into a bit of a further tonal discussion, especially with what happens earlier on in the night. Let's first break down the entire pedal board as well as a few important items to keep in mind that were in John's rack unit. Then we'll discuss kind of a few of the interesting things about Made in America and its tone. So let's start off with the primary pedal board, or what I like to call the primary pedal board for the Born and Raised Paradise Valley era, and it's the one that's on the left here. You start off with a polytune on there just for John's electric tuner. Then you have a full tone Fuzz OF1 version. This is the earlier kind of custom shop hand-built version that was from the 90s, and this pedal is absolutely insane, and this is what actually John used for that incredible tone of All Along the Watchtower. It's a really special pedal, and if you haven't tried one of these, especially the earlier versions out, I highly encourage you to give them a shot. And this one here also has the ability to switch between the octave mode and just the standard fuzz sound, and of course we can just hear John's using the standard fuzz mode for this evening's performance. Moving on, then we have two version 1 Keeley katanas. The first one is labeled Leveler, the second one is labeled Boost. What John did during this time in his career with his pedals is that he would always have one Keeley katana that he would use as kind of a leveler to help bring up the volume of some of his quieter guitars. Then he'd have one that just was your standard clean boost that he would push into the drive pedals, which the drive pedals were a Klon Centaur, and then you have an Ibanez TS10 following that on the front row. But when you're looking at this shot of John's pedal board here that I also have on my screen, you can clearly see that the signal chain is not Klon Centaur directly into Ibanez TS10. It actually goes into the Qtron Plus, then down into the Ibanez TS10. And the Born and Raised in Paradise Valley pedal board in general is very weird because it's not wired how you would normally think it would be wired, where it's right to left on the front row, then right to left on the back row. It actually goes from left to right on the back row there. So it's a little confusing, but that's how it's actually laid out, because you might have seen this and wondered, is he using his delays then into his rotary and reverb, or what's going on here? But no, John actually has it ordered completely differently on that back row. So of course we already touched on the Electro-Harmonix Qtron Plus, but actually sits between the Klon Centaur and the Ibanez TS10. Then we move on to the Strymon Flint. Following that we have the Strymon Lex, a Way Huge Octopus AP1 Mark I version, and then an earlier version of the Pete Cornish TES delay. Now, in terms of the second pedal board, which I kind of like to call John's auxiliary pedal board at this time during the Born and Raised Paradise Valley era, the main components that we're concerned with here are the RMC8 equalizer, John just having his wah pedal on this second pedal board because clearly it wouldn't fit. But in reality, if you were kind of looking to make a Born and Raised in Paradise Valley inspired pedal board, take the first board and then add in the RMC8 equalizer, and that's kind of what you can think of as the bread and butter of John's Born and Raised Paradise Valley pedals. There are on this auxiliary pedal board as well a couple of Keeley True Bypass loopers. The very first one activates the full tone tube tape echo that's in the rack unit. John would just step on that and then he would have that full tone tape echo playing. The second one that's on there actually has in a more ana echo as well as a TC Electronics Mini Ditto, the smaller kind of mini pedal sized one. John would use this when he'd make these looped delayed intros for Paper Doll during this era in time, but this wasn't used during the Made in America performance. But that's kind of that little setup that John has there. He steps on the one Keeley True Bypass looper, and then the looper and the delay are both on and activated at the same time. So that's really what's going on there with that auxiliary pedal board and all the kind of components we really need to be concerned with as far as the pedal board is concerned. Now, talking about the tone of Made in America, and I've alluded to something happening at the very beginning of the show a couple of times in this video. Now, right after Vultures, when John goes to turn off his overdrive pedals from the outro solo, he steps on the Klon Centaur, and then you hear just this unhappy noise, essentially, and then something's obviously clearly going on. I'm just going to play the clip for you guys.
Thank you. Sorry about that, I kicked something too hard.
So right there, you would have heard John say over to Renee through the mic, "Renee, I lost my pedal, I must have kicked it too hard," and that pedal ended up being the Klon Centaur. John just, by virtue of stepping on it, sometimes the way it goes is these switches on pedals, they aren't designed to last forever. They only have a finite number of actual switches that they'll be able to run through before the switches die. And that kind of sounds like that's what happened with this Klon. The switch itself actually broke when he stepped on it. He probably didn't step on it too hard. It was going to go, and it just ended up unfortunately being during the second song of Made in America that the Klon Centaur died. So this actually means that John, because the Klon Centaur died, he never had another pedal that he replaced it with. He didn't bring out a second Klon Centaur. He didn't bring out a clone of it. He performed the rest of Made in America without the Klon Centaur, which means that all of the lead tones you were hearing throughout the rest of the performance were utilizing the Ibanez TS10, as well as both Keeley Katanas working together to create John's lead tone, which is a lead tone that we haven't really ever heard from John before, where he's, instead of stacking with a Klon Centaur and a TS10, or even back in the old school days of a Blues Breaker and a TS10, he's relying on just the TS10 for his main drive sounds. And you see him various times throughout the set list actually bending down and adjusting the knobs on what we can only assume being the Ibanez TS10, as well as the two Keeley Katanas that are on his board. Maybe even he took one of the Keeley Katanas and pulled the boost knob out to give him more boost and a bit more gain and saturation from one of the pedals. It's absolutely impossible to say what John actually ended up doing, but I'm willing to bet he probably turned up the drive on the TS10 and the volume probably as well. So just very interesting and really cool that we're hearing a different lead tone from John. One really good example, I think, of John's kind of adapting to this new version of his lead sound, I guess, is Belief. When he starts playing Belief, it sounds good, but it's definitely not as kind of full as you'd expect it to sound. And then he steps on something else, and all of a sudden, wow, okay, you can really feel the almost punchiness from his guitar tone. And I think this is probably, at least I'm willing to bet, a good candidate for John going Keeley Katana into TS10 and then stacking on the second Keeley Katana as well. So having both Keeley Katanas going into the TS10 for that lead tone.
Now I can also move my fingers around on a guitar neck a little bit cleaner.
One other thing that I thought would be cool to mention just in terms of John's actual pedal board for Made in America is throughout the night you get different glimpses of the board, and you actually can see that what they did is move the Qtron Plus down where the Klon Centaur normally would go. So you can just deduce that the signal chain was both Keeley Katanas into Qtron Plus into Ibanez TS10. Now, they probably did that just by virtue of the different patch cables John had, and instead of trying to wire the one Keeley Katana up into the Qtron Plus on the back row, it probably just was a little tight, and they're like, no, let's just quickly move that down, run them all like that, and then the TS10 up into what I'd assume would be the Strymon Flint. One other clip I wanted to highlight for you guys that really shows John adjusting his settings on the fly here, and keep in mind, this is really the only time, at least I've ever seen John really having to adjust his drive settings in the middle of songs like this, so it's just a very unique thing that's really cool to highlight and show just his skill really at being calm, collected, bending down, okay, a little bit more drive here, maybe a little bit more volume here on this one, in the middle of a song even, and how the results end up being absolutely fantastic in everything he does. So this example is in Belief as well, and it's right before the outro solo. You actually see John, if you're John, he bends down in front of his pedal board on the right side, which I think would be the far Kili Katana, being the leveler Kili Katana. He adjusts something on the kind of far right side of the board, then he goes down and adjusts something on the far left, which that would be the TS10 for sure. But again, you see him adjusting both Katana and TS10 there, at least one of them. I'm assuming pretty much all three pedals, both Katanas and the TS10 would be on for this outro solo. But just another really great look at him, just on the fly. Okay, let's adjust things, especially maybe from the intro solo. He thought, okay, I definitely could have used maybe a little bit more volume there from that Katana, and then maybe just a tiny bit more gain from the TS10 for the kind of belief solo tones I'm going for. So he's thinking on the fly during these songs, which is just the mastery at the highest level, I think, of keeping calm, collected, and being able to do that and think about the tones you want while you're playing, and then being like, okay, I have a break, I can reach down quickly, turn that one up, okay, let's keep going. So just a really cool clip I wanted to highlight as well for you guys, just highlighting all of what we've been talking about. And as I mentioned when we were discussing John's pedal board, my favorite tone of the entire evening by far is the cover of All Along the Watchtower, and John using fuzz isn't something you hear that often. The Cornish NG2, of course, for Crossroads is one that we kind of consistently know from John, at least when Crossroads used to be performed in that way. However, this one of All Along the Watchtower, utilizing the just standard fuzz modes on the full-tone Octafuzz, the big box version from the 90s into the early 2000s, that's the one that John was using. It sounds absolutely fantastic with that Clapton Stratocaster, and this, for me, is a tone that you wouldn't necessarily expect from John, kind of obviously doing the Hendrix thing, but man, what a highlight from this performance as well. And I think for me, I used to have one of these full-tone Octafuzzes, these big box ones, and making this video for you guys again, I think I'm going to have to buy another one because, man, what a sound that he's getting with this fuzz pedal. It's just so brilliant. I definitely think I'm going to be buying another one of these, but let's take a listen. And I think John's ability to adapt and change up his kind of plans in terms of his pedal board right there in the middle of a show is obviously something every professional musician has to deal with. But the fact that they just kind of changed it up and didn't add another pedal on and instead went about just leaving the clon off it and not going with the replacement, I think just made everything a little bit more unique. Nowadays, I feel like if that were to happen, I feel like John would replace it with another clon centaur. I know he's mentioned before that he only owns one clon centaur. You know, it's John Mayer, you never know. He's got a ton of money. He could easily afford multiple clon centaurs, or even the J-Rocket Jeff Beck Archer. We've seen him using that clone of Jeff Beck's own clon centaur. I think he might just swap in a different pedal in terms of that, but then again, to the spaceships that John's been playing lately, he has multiple drive pedals where I'm sure he can make it work out with not having one of them on the board. But just a really cool look at John kind of adapting, and I think right before waiting on the world to change as well. It's another example off the top of my head where you actually see John kind of bends down, I'm going to adjust that a little bit, adjust that one a little bit. Okay, we're good to go for this one here. Adapting on the fly, adjusting his settings on the fly. It's kind of cool to see it in a professionally recorded festival performance like this, where we see some imperfection in the way of the plan and how things were probably, in their minds obviously supposed to go for that evening, but they still put on an absolutely killer, kick-ass performance, and kind of cool that we can look back on this unique version of John's tone because the clone just stopped working. So there you guys go. I hope you enjoyed the full breakdown of Made in America. If there are any other performances you'd like to see me break down and make a video like this for you guys, please, as always, let me know in the comments down below. Take care, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Anyway, go ahead and click the subscribe button if you like what you see.